Oh, how we doing, lads? Welcome to another episode. So this is going to be the next episode in our tutorial series. So I did release my 3sec 256 earlier today. The release video should be on my channel. So we're just going to get straight into it. So in this episode, we're going to talk about OOE stacking. So what OOE stacking basically is a way to stack sand using only one power. So specifically in this scenario, what we need to do is we need to render our sand before our hammer. So if we go multi and 150, we make this our power just here, put our ladder in, and then we can do our sand and then our hammer. So what we'll do is we'll just rig this whole thing up, and we'll do glass. Yeah, let's do glass. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put our sand rendered one tick after our power, and then we're going to have our hammer rendered 4 ticks, or 3 ticks after the power, 2 ticks after the sand. So what this is basically going to do is, I don't know the full in-depth reasoning as to why it does stack. I just know that it does pretty much. Sort of the best you got. Anyway. It's pretty heavily dependent on swing ratios, because you do need the explosion to be physically above the sand. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll just rig up this whole thing here, and we'll just throw in a guider. If this doesn't work, what we'll need to do is add 1 rev or add something to help us split it up. So it's pretty dependent on what you do and what ratios you use. But for the most part, this should work, I think. We just get a button and we put it in, and then we fire it. Let's see, did I put a block 36 down? I did. Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, you can see there that we do stack the sand, even with our sand physically rendered before our hammer. The trade-off is, of course, you then cannot slab bust with this setup. So there was always going to be a limitation, and that is the limitation. So you can't slab bust with it because your sand is rendered before your hammer. If you were to render your slab bust, say, the same timing as your hammer, but rendered after, what's going to happen is you're going to stack your sand first, and then because your slab bust is going off after your sand, you're then going to stack your slab bust at the very, very top of the sand stack. So your slab bust is not going to be able to destroy slabs. Or in this case, if you have a slab here, it's going to try and stack the sand, and then it might not even stack the slab bust, to be honest. I'm not sure. But basically, this might sound pretty bad until you realize that there are certain things you can do where you don't need slab bust. So there's 3 main things where this comes in handy. In the last episode, I talked about hammer ratios, where we were physically swinging up something called an overstack hammer and overstack sand. You also need this for restacking your OSRB sand, and you can also use this to rev hybrid. So rev hybriding is basically shooting sand and hammer vertically upwards, and then once it hits something here, it then stacks back down to the bottom. The reason why you can do this with a rev hybrid, why you don't need a slab bust for the rev hybrid, is often you're going to have a separate set of powers to actually stack on the wall, and then something else to rev hybrid. That's not always the case. Often you can do it with a worm as well, in which case you should only need 1 power anyway, because what you'll do is you'll worm along the ground, and that worming's going to destroy your slabs anyway, and at a certain point you're going to rev hybrid up, and then your splitter's going to go off, or your 1 rev's going to go off, whatever you want to call it. It's going to split it up, and then it's going to stack again. So that's sort of how this works. Do I want to make an overstacker? I might do just here. I'm sort of just having a think, because there's sort of, it's a very, very niche sort of thing at the moment. Not many people run overstackers in this version because of how easy they are to clip out. But I can sort of show you the process of making one. So I'm not going to use any ratios. I'm just going to probably just go for it, to be honest. I was thinking about trying to add one into an actual cannon, and then I realized I'd need to like rig up that cannon there with like another sand comp. because if you're shooting this all out with your first power, your second power, sorry, your hammer power, you're gonna need a separate sand comp to hold all the sand. Okay, I probably won't do that. So what I'm going to do in this case here is I'm just going to talk about the methodology behind overstacking and OSRBing, and then we can sort of go from there probably in the next one. So anyway, we'll get straight into it. So we'll start with overstacking. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to basically run through what happens on your normal 256 or 384 or any cannon that really stacks sand on the wall. And then we're going to talk about how we can make it overstack. So of course, you get two packages shot. You get your first one, which is your first power, which is going to be your sand, slab bust, search slab, TNT. Sand, slab bust, 1 rev is pretty much in that one, and nuke as well. So this will be our slab bust, and this will be our nuke. And this will be our 1 rev. Okay, perfect. And then up here, we're going to be shooting our one-shot sand, which is going to be red concrete. OS sand. And then we're going to also be shooting our hammer. So this is the setup that you'd want for, do I strip out the nuke? No, I'll put in the nuke hammer as well. This is the standard setup that you want for, I think, any of these 255s basically. We had this sort of setup here. We did have bypass with your first power as well, but we won't worry about that here. But basically, yeah, 1 rev goes off, pushes the sand, the hammer back up, and then it restacks off your nuke, and then your hammer shoots everything back down. Now, with overstacking, we're going to be shooting a little bit more. So what's going to happen here is, I'm just going to take out the nuke for now. I don't write nuke there, that was meant to be nuke hammer. And we're just going to run through sort of what happens to this point. Okay, so your 1 rev goes off, pushes your sand up. Your hammer goes off, stacking your sand down. Pretty simple. Now basically what's going to happen here, in that swing video, like my previous video, I talked about why having a bad hammer ratio would shoot your one-shot sand up. Sorry. But basically, you can abuse that. And sort of what you want to be shooting up is not only your one-shot sand, but you also want to be shooting up your, or you're going to be adding in to your second power something called your OS hammer. In this case, we're just going to rewrite that as one shot. And then we're going to be just using OS as overstack. And what we're also going to be shooting is, I'll use andesite. I'm going to be shooting something called our overstack sand as well. Overstack sand. And then we've got our splitter. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to be using the swing from our hammer to shoot a bunch of stuff upwards. So we shoot up to about, say, there. So all of this will be stacked up here. Now what's going to happen, actually that's not a splitter, that's a stopper technically. What's actually going to happen here is 1 game tick before your hammer goes off, your stopper's going to go off. Now what the stopper basically does is, in the last video, I think I talked about how the actual explosion for TNT is like 1 block in the 1 block forwards in the velocity from where the last game tick of flight is meant to be. So say if your TNT is moving at like 1 block a second, and the last game tick, the 80th game tick is here, it's actually going to be exploding like a block above roughly. Basically what we're going to be doing with that is we're going to be abusing our stopper. So basically what will happen is this is all going to be shot up. Now since this has all got upwards velocity, this stopper, when it explodes, it's actually going to be a game tick above where it goes off. Or where it's meant to be dead, a game tick above that, it's going to be technically exploding. So what that means basically is it's going to be working against the swing of your first, or of your hammer. So when your stopper goes off, it's going to sort of stop everything in the middle here. This is quite important for your it's quite important for your one-shot sand, actually, your stopper. If you don't have a stopper, you're going to have a very, very rough time trying to restack your one-shot sand. But basically, what's going to happen here is your stopper's going to go off. I'm just going to break that there just to sort of show that. And it's going to sort of like hang everything just in here for a game tick, effectively. And then what's going to happen is you're going to render your overstack sand before your stopper and before your hammer. So since we've got this rendered before, we can then use the swing from the overstack hammer here to stack this sand. So we're going to end up stacking it like that, and provided that you have a good ratio on your overstack hammer here, something that swings it down, you're also going to be swinging your one-shot sand back down just like that. So you're going to end up in a situation like this on the wall. And basically what that means is, that guide isn't completely accurate there, while your barrel height is physically here, and you're stacking at barrel height, you're physically going to be stacking about 4 blocks above where you're actually shooting. So a bunch of people are going to really, really struggle against this. And that's because they're going to be looking at where the sand's stacking, and if they don't realize that it's overstacking, they could just be patching the top here. Now, because it's shooting it up, and it doesn't matter if you patch sort of like the top area, you can just shoot it underneath like this. And if you patch that top bit there, it's going to ignore that, because you're not stacking up that high. You're actually stacking down here, shooting it up, and restacking down the bottom there. So that's sort of the power of one of these overstackers. An additional advantage is you can go through a small amount of rev layers if you want to shoot underneath something. You can also use your overstack to get up underneath certain parts of bases. And yeah, in certain scenarios, you can also use it to bypass certain parts of the base. But anyway, that's sort of overstacking in a nutshell. One thing that I do want to talk about very, very quickly as well is how you would nuke with this setup. So imagine you're in a position like this on the wall, where your nuke, because your nuke's rendered after your sand stack, your nuke's actually going to be in this top block here. So this is going to be your nuke here. And up here, because this is where the one-shot sand ends up, that's going to be our nuke hammer. Now, for those who have been watching along with this series for quite a while, you will start to realize the problem here. We're going to get absolutely dog shit exposure between our nuke hammer and our nuke. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to have something that goes off a little bit before our nuke hammer. Some people call it a re-swing scatter. I just usually call it re-swing. And the reason why it's called a re-swing scatter or a re-swing is because we're actually using swinging again to fire our nuke hammer back down. So when this re-swing goes off, a little bit after that, it's going to destroy the top of the sand stack and it's going to physically shoot our nuke hammer back down here. Now, as the water's flowing down, it's going to be dry here. So what's going to happen then is your nuke is going to go off inside the sand stack, or your nuke hammer is going to go off first, nuke's going to go off inside the sand stack, and you're going to nuke normally. Well, that was a bit of a mouthful. If you weren't paying attention, that's fine here, because in the next video we're actually going to start smashing out some ratios for some of these. So what we're going to do from here now is we're going to sort of talk about OSRB. It's pretty much the same thing as overstacking, except we just want to overstack blocks that we've already destroyed. So it's going to be a little bit finicky at time, and often with these things, ratio finding is always a bit of a pain. So what we're going to do here is, okay, so again, exact same scenario. We are going to stack on the wall, and we're going to have our red sand, and we're going to make it here. Okay, so this one's a bit more fucky. So there's sort of two ways you can do this. You can do this with a scatter, or you can do this with just your OSRB hammer. So what I mean by the scatter is we are using two separately timed bits of TNT. one to blow a hole in the top of the sand stack, and then one to restack the OSRB sand. That's like with a scatter-based OSRB, and then alternatively you can also use your scatter OSRB or your scatter as your OSRB hammer basically. So it's going to be scattering and restacking with the exact same shot. I will note now that that non-scatter based OSRB, where you just have your OSRB hammer, that does not work on complex. So that's something you need to keep in mind. You can only use the 2 power. You can only use the 2 power overstack, or not the 2 power, the scatter based overstack method on complex. We're using 2 separately timed bits of TNT. So basically, for your overstack here, your overstack. Oh, not your overstack, your OSRB. I'm losing my train of thought everywhere today. So basically what's going to happen is at the wall here, we want a hammer ratio. We're just going to talk about the OSRB based, or the one OSRB hammer sort of method, I guess. There's no nice way to describe it. Basically what you want to do is you want to swing your sand and shit back down. So it's going to be swinging back down from your nuke here, and you're going to be rendering your one-shot sand here. I think it's before your 1 rev for this type of OSRB. I haven't done this type of OSRB in a while, so my timings could be a little bit off, but I'm pretty sure it's before your 1 rev. So basically what's going to happen on the wall here is when the hammer goes off, what it's going to do is it's going to stack your one-shot sand, and then it's going to fire your OSRB hammer. And because that sand there is rendered before what's going to be your OSRB hammer, it's going to end up stacking first, basically. So sort of in order, what you want to be rendered first is your OS sand, before, I'm pretty sure it's before 1 rev, or it could just be before hammer. I'm not 100%, as I said, a bit rusty with this setup. But yeah, basically before your 1 rev, you want your OS sand to render. So after that, you want your hammer to go off. Okay. So your hammer's going to go off. Now, after your hammer, what you're going to have is your, I'm going to get andesite for this one just so it doesn't fall down again. So 1 tick after your hammer, you want your gravel to be rendered. Or gravel, red sand, whatever you're using to stack as the OSRB hammer, you want to be rendered. So we'll call this OSRB sand. So basically what's going to happen is, in order, your one-shot sand's going to end up at the top. Your hammer is, I think actually in this case here, your hammer, I'm pretty sure blows up the top of the sand stack because your one-shot sand's actually rendered before your hammer. I'm pretty sure your hammer's actually used to blow up your one-shot sand in this scenario. I could be wrong on that because I haven't done this style in ages, but I think it's actually a hammer in this case. And then from there, so 1 tick after your hammer, 1 tick after hammer, OSRB sand. So that's your OSRB sand. We haven't stacked this yet. So at the wall, what it's basically going to look like is this sand has been destroyed here by a hammer, and this OSRB sand is now starting to fall down. And then 1 tick after your OSRB sand, you want your OSRB hammer to go off. So it's going to look like that. Oh, I'll just write 1 tick after. 1 tick after OSRB sand. Sand. Close enough. And then that will be our OSRB hammer. So what's going to happen now is after the sand gets destroyed by a hammer, it's going to render our OSRB sand, and then using the 1 power OOE stacking, like we talked about before, it's going to physically restack our OSRB just like that. Ooh, and yeah, usually I think it's 1 block below barrel height, but you should be able to just abuse swinging again, so that you do end up with some additional, you can have like a second piece of one-shot sand that you render after everything here that will actually stack back up on the top. So if you need to, take a screenshot of that. And yeah, I'll do each of these ratios in their own separate video, including overstacking. But yeah, for the most part, that's how your OSRB is going to work. So from this point onwards, then we are just going to break a load. So this is what it's going to look like at the wall. Because this sand's been destroyed here, the nuke's actually going to end up down here. I think the nuke's going to end up at the bottom of your OSRB sand stack. It doesn't end up at the top, even though it is rendered before, because it is shot with the second power, and the OSRB hammer, I think, just stacks it down the bottom, basically. So anyway, what's going to happen from here is, again, same scenario. We're going to end up with our nuke hammer at the top, nuke at the bottom. What's going to happen? Again, we're just going to use reswing, and we're just going to get a TNT ratio that shoots the TNT down, and we're just going to shoot it down like that, and then while it's still dry, we're just going to tunnel it all the way. Okay, so that's 2 out of 3. And then for your third one, this is going to be the second method of OSRB, which is going to be using that reswing hammer to swing everything, or not the reswing hammer, sorry, the scatter before. I can't remember what OSRB scatter timings I did have for my ratio. I don't have that off by heart, but I'm pretty sure you can have the one-shot sand in this scenario later, because you're not using the hammer to blow up your restack anymore. What you're using instead is you are using a separate scatter. So again, we'll end up with a situation like this on the wall. So in your hammer, you're going to have 2 pieces of TNT, one of which is going to be your scatter, and then we're going to have our OSRB hammer. This one can be less timing precise than the other one as well, by the way. Rendering is still very, very important with this one, but the timings aren't as important. And then, of course, we will have our... Oh, okay, there we go. OSRB sand, and then we will have our one-shot sand as well, or our second one-shot sand, second OS sand. Okay, so what's going to happen here? Everything stacks normally, but this one-shot sand here is actually going to be rendered after your hammer. So it'll be rendered just after your hammer, but before your scatter here. And then your scatter is going to go off. Your scatter here is going to physically destroy this sand stack. So that's our scatter gone. And then after the scatter goes off, we will render our OSRB sand. Again, OOE queuing. So I think for one of my ratios I had scatter, and then that was rendered, I think that was rendered in the same game tick as my scatter, but because it is naturally rendered later, the OSRB hammer still goes after it. So then one tick after my scatter, I think I had my OSRB hammer going off. So that OSRB hammer again just used OOE stacking to stack everything like that. And then of course you want to get that swing ratio where you end up with your one-shot sand on top, and you'll end up in a position like this. And from this point here, of course, you have your nuke hammer, and again you just re-swing your nuke hammer back down, and then you nuke all the way down. What an absolute marathon. One thing that I will note as well is you can use your OSRB hammer to re-swing your overstack up, and you can also use your overstack to OSRB. So there's a very, very weird scenario where what you can do is, okay, so there's sort of 2 scenarios you can run with from here. So you've got overstack OSRB, where you actually overstack first. So what it'll look like is you'll overstack like that, and then you will OSRB this top bit of the stack here, and it'll look like something, Jesus, what do I even use? I don't know. It'll look like, I might just do gravel at the top, and then you do like red sand. You'll end up like in a scenario like this on the wall or something, where you're like overstacking and then OSRBing, and you're just going to make an absolute mess of the walls. Because basically what's happening here is you're OSRBing a bunch of blocks higher, so you're getting a much nastier OSRB hole in the wall. So that's the first sort of combination you can do. The second thing you can do is you can OSRB first. So basically you'll stack all the way up, stack up to here, your OSRB will go off, and what will happen is it will restack your OSRB down like this. Standard stuff for the time being. But at this point what you do is you reswing your scatter upwards. So is that okay? No, I want that down by a little bit. Yeah, what you'll do at this point here is you'll reswing your scatter upwards. So you'll shoot that up like that, and then you will overstack like that. In this scenario here, I won't really cover it now, but there's something else dirty you can do with this that I won't cover. Okay, so from that point there, you can probably tell that you can do a lot of funky shit with these ratios. And what you can do is OSRB, overstack, and then you can OSRB your overstack as well. I want to do a cannon like that. I haven't had the time for it yet, but that would be absolutely disgusting. And yeah, I'm pretty sure what you could do in that case is you can just crawl up a wall. Another thing that I have wanted to do is overstack OSRB, overstack OSRB, overstack OSRB or something, where you're just crawling up the wall like 4 or 5 different times, overstacking and like OSRBing each time. Just as an absolute piss take, to be honest. But yeah, apart from that, that's sort of this video done. So I'll catch you all in the next one, which will probably be actually timing out these ratios on a multi-dispenser rig, getting them ready for the main cannon. But yeah, apart from that, that should be all of it. So I'll catch you all in the next one.